We have reached this month of April a tremendously influential period of days known as Fordicidia in ancient Rome. And I said ancient Rome, but you are probably thinking, well, that was a long time ago. Yes, it was, but they're still practicing this very same religion right in front of your very eyes, right in the open. In Rome, the Greek Mother Earth nymph and goddess Chloris's name was changed to Flora. She was the goddess of flowers in spring. As a primal manifestation of the Mother Earth goddess, she causes all of the planets to grow, and she brings to fruition that which has blossomed. She is the divine patroness of all gardens, orchards, fields, agriculture, and everything that blossoms, grows, and ripens. Flora was worshipped by the Romans from a very early date, because it goes back to ancient Babylon. The high priest of Flora in Rome was the Flamen Floralis, one of the priesthood's high priest. He believed to have been established by King Numa in the 17th century before Christ, around the time the city was founded of Rome, founded in 1753 by Romulus and Remus. There were at least a couple of temples in Rome dedicated to Flora. A little slip there, and you may know now where the name of the state Florida did actually come from. Flora was a deity whose name has changed, and what deity hasn't? Through time, it has been changed. But this Fordicidia group of days, 13 days beginning April 5th to May 1st, 13 days of blood sacrifice was offered to the gods. Now, Rome had a couple of temples dedicated to Flora, but they're not around today if you visit Rome and toured. There's a statue of her, though, in the Capitoline Museum. Her festival, the Floralia, or Ludi Floralis, held in her honor, was officially set into law by Julius Caesar first when he fixed the Roman calendar and ran it from April 28th to May 3rd. And it was celebrated with games, theatrical presentations called the Ludi Floralis. Flora was a common name for prostitutes in ancient Rome in those days also, because of this goddess. At night, the city was illuminated with special lamps and torches so that celebrations of spring could actually continue without stopping. There were chariot races and the Circus Maximus, during which Flora was the patroness of the green chariot movement. Yes, the same green movement that is on today. You didn't know it was then in ancient Rome also? There's nothing new under the sun. History is simply repeating itself. Today, we could call them the greenies or the environmentalists. After the chariot races on the last day of the festival, hares, rabbits, goats, and roe deer were released in the circus for a ritual hunt. These animals were considered to be the symbols of fertility, you see, and it was thought to catch one would bring prosperity to the lucky person who caught it. In the middle of the Floralia on May 1st, the Romans had a special ritual, a celebration dedicated to this name, to the name of the Greek goddess Flora, Maya, the mother of Hermes. Today, the month of May is directly named after this goddess Maya. Of all of the celebrations of May 1st, or May Day, are directly descended from the Floralia in Rome, dedicated to the Greek goddess Maya. See, in different empires, the goddesses of the day had different names, but the same personages, just the name changed. That's why it's so confusing when people delve into past ancient history and see all these gods and goddesses. And there's so many of them. Well, there's not really. The names just change to add confusion. The rituals to Maya on May 1st were presided over by the high priest of Vulcan, the Flamen Volcanilis. During the rituals, he sacrificed a pregnant cow or pig, sow, to her and burned the unborn calf or piglets whole. This sacrifice was called the Holocaust. You can't make this stuff up. More history repeating itself when I return. It's View from Space Talk Radio, AM 640 with the early 8 o'clock start. And I'm just getting started. CD writes a couple of movies out on DVD this Tuesday, the 24th, Space, called The Wicker Tree, 11-11-11. Interesting storylines in those two. A lot of stuff you've talked about, especially surrounding the release of the Hunger Games. Entertainment again programming us for the impending shift on our planet. Glad you're on again for 4 hours these days. Signed CD. So as I said before the break, the rituals to Maya, May 1st, were presided over by the high priest of Vulcan. And during the rituals, there was pregnant cattle or pregnant pigs, but the stipulation was the female had to be pregnant at the time, and the unborn burned after the mother was killed with them inside. The sacrifice was called the Holocaust. I'm talking about the year 700 BC. They use that word. They're just bringing it back when you hear it, and you did this week. Why? Because of what I'm speaking about tonight. They are still practicing their religion, and they're going to put it as the number one religion, the only religion in the world when they're all done. The Illuminati have the great work almost completed. In her capacity as the Roman Mother Earth goddess of cereals, she was also called Ceres, after which the modern word cereal is taken from. So you're actually invoking Ceres, the ancient Roman goddess of grains, when you say, "Who ate all the cereal? Where's the cereal, Mom?" Keeping it alive through the ages is what they're all about. After which the modern times, this passed away, these celebrations, because the Roman Catholic Church came along and said, well, the blood sacrifices out in the open are a little crude. So the Holocaust sacrifice on April 19th every year was called the Cerealia. Hitler's Nazi Holocaust sacrifice of the Jews was a reenactment of this Cerealia sacrifice. That is why he changed the chief celebration day of communism and socialism from May 1st to April 19th. It's also why he sent tanks with flamethrowers into the Warsaw Ghetto to burn all of the Jews with their children in the morning of April 19th, 1943. Exactly the same time the sacrifice originated in the Feast of Ishtar, now called Easter, and celebrated by the apostate Christian church dedicated to the spring Mother Earth goddess of Babylon, Ishtar. The original Ishtar procession way, lined with lions and dragons, and Ishtar's gate covered with dragons and bull reliefs of her temple, and her eighth gate, the most famous gate of Ishtar, of course, was solid gold of lions, the main gate of the entrance to Babylon. Guess what the name of the motion picture company that produced The Hunger Games? Lionsgate. Now, the original Ishtar processional way, lined with lions, as I said, and dragons, and the Ishtar gate covered with dragons' bull reliefs of her temple, the pergamon altar of the sun god, Satan's seat in Revelation 2:13, by the way, from Babylon, are now in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. They're cherished. And the two main headed, horned, winged bull statues of Nimrod, Baal, Marduk, representative of the Babylonian sun god and king of Babylon, are now in the British Museum. This bull, Zeus, is now shown on all British EU identity cards and is now one of the chief symbols of the EU as letters. Mystery, that spell mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Remember, in Rome, her prostitutes, harlots, were actually called by her name, Flora. And on May 1st every year, her name was changed when she was worshipped as Maya, the great mother goddess of the earth. Each year in Rome, there were essentially 3 prime Holocaust sacrifices, and other lesser ones too, given to this Mother Earth goddess in each of her 3 different goddess aspects. The first was consecrated to her as the Earth goddess, Tellus, in the feast of Fordicidia on April 15th. No, I didn't mention the name of your telephone. Tellus, you see. Yes, it is the name of a phone company, but as I say, just like series and serial, brought back, kept alive. That's why Tellus is the name of one of the phone companies, keeping it alive. This goddess. The second was to her as the cereal goddess Ceres in the feast of Cerealia on April 19th. And the third was to the great goddess Maya on May 1st. 3, royalty. As the supreme great Mother Earth goddess Maya, she was called Maya, Majestias, Maja, the majestic. Both Maya and Majestas are taken from the Latin magnus, meaning great or powerful. Maya is the great, powerful Mother Earth goddess who symbolizes the power and wealth of the entire earth. The English word majesty, used to describe, for instance, the monarch who is celebrating a birthday today, April 21st, right here in Fordicidia. Celebrations. Queen Elizabeth II, 21-gun salute by Her Majesty's Royal British Navy earlier today. So this is where the word majesty comes from, to describe Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. It's directly taken from the Greek and Latin word Maya. In Greek mythology, Zeus, the sun, and Maya, the earth, fathered a son, Hermes, god of trade, liars, and thieves. In Roman mythology, Jupiter, the sun, and Maya, the earth, fathered a son, Mercury, god of merchants, liars, and thieves. Today, the words merchant or merchandise are taken from the name of the god, Mercury. In ancient Greece, Hermes was known as the herdsman of the dead. In British Israel World Freemasonry today, headed by His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, who today stands in for the Queen. Hermes is considered to be their pagan founder. Maya is the Greek and Roman great and powerful Queen of Heaven and mother of harlots, derived from the goddess Ishtar of Babylon, where all the ancient bloodlines of all Roman empires came from. On the Ishtar Tryst, April 8th, the day of the Masters, New Year's Day in the ancient Babylonian calendar. If you were with me last week, you would have heard me go much deeper into that subject. She's called Isis in Egypt, and she is worshipped by all the pagan religions of the world in one form or another. In Roman Catholic Church, she is called the Virgin Mary. Her various feast days in May highlight her widespread popularity in different heathen religions and gods. So Fordicidia got underway April 15th. It goes all the way to May 1st. It started this week, this past Sunday. 13 days of blood sacrifice to the beast, ending May 1st, the high witching holiday of Beltane. That's when George W. Bush was on the aircraft carrier, calling a halt to all operations in Iraq when they had really just begun. But it was the high witching holiday of Beltane. And the May 1st maypole, with the children involved with the lovely ribbons going around the maypole, which is obviously a phallic symbol. The children are happy. Why? Because they have dodged Fordicidia and did not succumb or were picked for a sacrifice. No wonder they were happy May 1st to celebrate. They survived the spring seed sacrifice days, planting of the seeds. That's why the children, and it is for the children May 1st, that's why they're happy. They survived. When I come back in history, recent history, Fordicidia comes to life. Space, back with more. It's Talk Radio AM 640. Back with more in a minute. Fordicidia, 13 days of blood sacrifice. We have entered upon it this past Sunday, April 15th. May 1st is the end. Now, in ancient Rome, they took their partying and their ritual blood sacrifices very seriously. It was law. And it's returning one day and soon. This will be the only religion left when the Illuminati are done. Fordicidia is still being reenacted today, right through our history. April 19th, 1943, already alluded to it. Hitler sent Nazi stormtroopers and flamethrowers into the Warsaw Ghetto, burns and shoots Jews. 50 years to the day, April 19th, 1993. Later, 50 years to the day later, April 19th, 1993, troops are sent into the Branch Davidian complex. Guns and flamethrowers kill men, women, and children. April 19th, 1995, Oklahoma City bombing, Alfred E. Murrah Building, American Kids Daycare Center, located on one of the lower floors. Killed by fire, men, women, and children. April 20th, 1999, Columbine Massacre. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold shoot and have bombs. 13 die. April 16th, 2007, Virginia Tech Massacre. Sung Hui Cho, with help, but it was never reported, shoots up 2 classrooms in a hallway full of people. The magic number, 33, are killed. Remember, 11 is the vision for the Illuminati of the world. Action for that vision is the 22 number. And the guidance for the world is 33, the triple 11. Highest magnification possible in witchcraft is 3. That's why, as a little child, or when you were a child, you're reading little children's stories to your kids now, saying, click her heels 3 times, or say this 3 times, and a magic spell will be cast, or magic will happen after the 3rd time. That's where it's derived from. Yes, we are indeed still being put through this incredibly barbaric, grotesque ritual as we go through our modern history, because the movers and shakers, planners and builders of our world are following their religion. And all of this must be done for the coming one. The month of Aprilis takes its name from an Etruscan god of the same name, Veneralia, of April 1st. Veneralia is the festival of Venus, Fordicidia. The goddess Fortuna Virilis, apparently, is also worshipped as part of this festival, April 4th through the 10th. In honor of Cybele, the Great Mother, first games of the year when the calendar year begins in March, and the most solemn. It heralds spring, you see, and planting of the seed, so must shed blood to the goddess in anticipation of harvest. So, when the seeds come out, the blood is spilled. When the seeds are reaped with their harvest of what they've been growing, more blood is spilled to give thanks. The following description is from the procession that carries on from April 4th to the end of Fordicidia. Day 1, a procession and ceremony at Magna Mater Temple. The great Asian Earth Mother, Magna Mater, was introduced to Rome around the time Hannibal was marching through Italy. Caesar officiated the first day's events as he was senior curule adele. The sacrifice was a dish of herbs. Events in Circus Maximus had Caesar holding a pageant, no racing, not enough time. Caesar tapped into the Tiber and channeled water across the Forum Boarium to recreate a river inside the Maximus Circus, the Roman Parthenon, with a spina doing duty as Forum Boarium to create a river. And the spina made an island, a Tiber island, and separated the stream. Caesar depicted the Vestal Claudius' feat of strength by towing the barge bearing Magna Mater's navel stone up the stream into the circus. A young, fragile Vestal played the role of Claudia, but did not have to tow the barge. Under the stern, you see, a crew of men were concealed secretly inside the ship beneath the false hull of the gilded barge and pushed it through waist-deep water. But it looked as though the great leader was pulling it. A glossy black ball represented the naval stone. It was a 3-hour show and a huge crowd pleaser. I'm talking Super Bowl status in Rome. Days 2 through 5, which are corresponding to our days of April 5th through 8th, up to Master's Day. Theater performances in 10 temporary wooden structures holding 500 to 10,000 people each went underway. Theaters were painted, decorated, gilded to look permanent. Again, Caesar's games. Farces and mimes in bigger theaters, Terence and Plautus and Ennius in smaller ones, and Sophocles and Hylas in smallest, very Greek-looking auditoriums. Free refreshments were served during the intervals. All free. Day 6, corresponding to our April 9th, a procession assembled on Capitol and wended its way down through the Forum Romanum and the Via Triumphalis to Circus Maximus, parading gilded statues of some gods like Mars and Apollo and Castor and Pollux. Caesar paid for the gilding, so Castor was much larger than Pollux. Then the races. First, race cars or carts were drawn by 4 horses pulled up abreast, 4 abreast of one another, with a cart behind. Other races, 2 horses pulled up abreast, or 2 or 3 horses were harnessed in tandem, one after the other. Also, there were races with unyoked horses ridden bareback by postilions. Each race was 5 miles long. Description of track, eggs, dolphins, all kinds of shape. Just like we, and it's not a stretch, it's just like we do in Formula One auto racing today. And that's when the racing gets underway. In the month of April, in Formula One, the highest technologically advanced car racing league in the world. Other smaller racetracks too, horse races. And this is where we get the idea from. It's never changed. If the 12 hours of day and night were of equal length, then each race took 1/4 hour of the day and night to run at a pace fast and furious. There were spills, daggers to cut reins, carried no long breaks between the races either. It was one after another. They just kept coming. All kinds of fun watching them take advantage of one another, injure one another. Lots of bets, too. No vacant seats here. The place was rockin'. Wives on husbands' laps, but no children. No slaves or no freedmen allowed. Freedman in ancient Rome was a person who was belonging to another country that was taken over by Rome and conquered. And when they agreed to live within the system of the Roman Empire, they were freedmen. Women sat with men. More than 200,000 jammed into Circus Maximus, while thousands more watched from every vantage point on the Palatine and Aventine hills. Rome was built on 7 hills. That's 2 of them. Games were supposedly paid by public funds, but state money was never allocated for it. Money from collection of fines and personal money. Mostly Caesar's was used. This is Spaceman going through Fordicidia, reminding you of everything that we do today comes from ancient Rome and ancient Babylon. It's a view from space, Talk Radio, AM 640. More in a minute. RG writes, my parents, who are baby boomers, have since fell into the television show called Game of Thrones. The show has a high, obsessive influence of kings and lords while showing smut and overall filth from the Dark Ages. Recently, Tupac, a deceased hip-hop artist, became, which would I feel, the first Project Bluebeam stunt with his performance singing Hail Mary. Tupac, the so-called king of hip-hop, was resurrected for this little bit of Project Blue Beam. It seems like we are in program overload by the overlords. Childhood's end to raise their king. Keep doing what you do. Signed, RG. Now, just before the break, I was speaking about the kickoff, day 1, April 4th. Then what happened on April 5 through 8, which was the week before this, day 6, April 9th, and the festival of Fordicidia is well underway. These games were held, as I said, to honor Ceres, goddess of grain. The Sibylline books were consulted after a drought in 498 BC. Romans interpreted the message to mean that the Greek gods Dionysus for wine, Demeter for grain, and Persephone for the seasons should be honored by them. A Greek architect was engaged to design a Greek-style temple to Demeter, now called Ceres by the Romans. This temple sat on the Aventine Hill. Fines collected by the plebeian Aediles, or the tribuni plebis, the law, were used to maintain this temple. Games were held annually to honor Ceres, sacrifice a pregnant sow to Ceres, and held at the Aventine Temple. For Ceres, Tellus, Liber, and Libera, and Consus, all of the goddesses. There were horse races in the Circus Maximus, and the release of foxes in fields with their tails aflame. I believe this is where the English fox hunt actually began. And now, of course, you could never hold a fox hunt sending foxes with their tails aflame into the woods. But nevertheless, that's where fox hunting was born. Festival of Jupiter, Victor, and Jupiter Libertas is on April 13th. Fordicidia, the day, was the 15th. Fordicidia, a festival at Rome. As I said, the pregnant cow sacrificed to Tellus in each of the 30 wards of the city to promote fertility of cattle in the fields. The unborn calves, of course, burned, and the ashes were used in a purification rite in the festival of Perilia. I don't want to gross you out, but I want to make the point. Can you believe how they went out of their way to overkill the children? First, they killed the pregnant mother, which, of course, the fetus would die inside of the mother. Then they would take out the fetus of the mother and then burn the fetus and then sprinkle the ashes on the people to promote purification at the festival of Perilia, Rome's birthday. And Perilia, celebrated April 21st, along with Queen Elizabeth II's birthday today. When the third day after the Ides of April dawns, you priests offer a pregnant Forda cow in sacrifice. Forda is a cow in calf and fruitful from ferendo, meaning carrying. They consider fetus is taken from the same root as ferendo. Now, the cattle are big with young, and the ground's pregnant with seed, a teeming victims given to teeming earth. Some are killed on Jupiter's citadel, the Curia, the wards. You get 30 cows. They're drenched with plenty of sprinkled blood, but when the priests have torn the calves from their mother's womb and thrown the slashed entrails on the smoking hearth, the oldest Vestal burns the dead calves in the fire, so their ashes can purge the people on the day of Pallas. In Numa's kingship, the harvest failed to reward men's efforts. The farmers, deceived, offered their prayers in vain. At one time that year it was dry, never cold, but this year it was. The northerlies blew. The next, the fields were rank with endless rain. Often the crop failed the farmer in his first sprouting, and meager wild oats overran choked soil. And the cattle dropped their young prematurely, and the ewes often died giving birth to lambs. There was an ancient wood long untouched by the axe, still sacred to Pan, the god of Menelaus. He gave answers to calm minds in night silence. Here, Numa sacrificed twin ewes. The first fell to Faunus, the second to gentle sheep. Both the fleeces were spread on the hard soil. Twice the king's unshorn head was sprinkled with spring water. Twice he pressed the beech leaves to his forehead. He abstained from sex. No meat could be served either at table, nor could he wear a ring on any finger. Dressed in rough clothes, he lay on the fresh fleeces, having worshipped the god with appropriate words. Meanwhile, night falls, her calm brow wreathed with poppies, bringing with her shadowy dreams. That's what poppies do. It's opium. Faunus appeared, and pressing the fleece with a hard hoof from the right side of the bed, he uttered these words: "King, you must appease earth with the death of 2 cows. Let one heifer give 2 lives in sacrifice." Fear banished sleep. Numa pondered the vision, considered the ambiguous and dark command. His wife, Giria, most dear to the grove, eased his doubt, saying, "What's needed are the innards of a pregnant cow." The innards of a pregnant cow were offered. The year proved more fruitful, and earth and cattle bore their increase, and everything became all right. This is the week of April 16th to the 22nd. Now, called Earth Week, with Earth Day beginning the 22nd. And I pointed out what happened in history on these dates. WACO, Virginia Tech. It's just simply unbelievable that they all fall on April 15th through May 1st. Chernobyl also, as well as Hitler and the Warsaw Ghetto, the Oklahoma City bombing, Columbine massacre. Just an incredible display of the ancient rituals of Fordicidia. It seems to me that we allow it. It seems to me that these dates roll around every year, and I bring the same things up every year, and yet people just turn their heads and go on about their business, and it repeats again. Over and over and over again. They used fire in Waco. The fire which Willie Peter was used produces heat so intense, the combustion so complete that the victims, as in the case of Hitler in the Warsaw Ghetto, people can only be identified by their dental records as how hot the flame is. We're talking phosphorus. Phosphorus is Willie Peter. It's just an incredibly cruel way to die. But fire, white phosphorus, is one of the most fearsome incendiary devices imaginable. When was it last used? Gaza. A couple of years ago. Or was it in 2008? I believe it was 2008. Spaceman back with more in a moment. If you can take it. Fordicidia, and more to come on the other side of the break. On Talk Radio AM 640. 640, having to cover Fordicidia once again. What is Fordicidia? It's a 13-day blood sacrifice celebration for the gods of the spring planting. celebrated from the 15th of April, ending at the 1st of May, with some fun and frivolity for the children because they survived, because the main sacrifice were children. Just as Waco, Texas, Oklahoma City bombing, fall in the width of the horns of the Baphomet goat, both these operations moved America closer to the New World Order. And you know what? It was Bill Clinton that was the president then. And you know what? After they went in with the flamethrowers and the guns in that Branch Davidian compound, 1993 on April 19th, Bill Clinton was praised, just as Hitler was able to place the blame for the burning Reichstag Parliament building on the communists. Bill Clinton blamed it on the Branch Davidians, even though the Nazi provocateurs had set the blaze. So that he was able to seize complete power in Germany, on the one hand being able to persecute the communists on the other. This is exactly the way it's gone with religion since '93 in the Oklahoma bombing and the Waco, Texas massacre. Both planned tragedies fulfilled the basic Illuminati formula for staging an event. They continue to exude the power of witchcraft as exemplified by the goat's horns of the Baphomet goat. So, did you know that April 19th is the most important day every year in the satanic calendar of High Holy Days? Begins this 13-day period of blood sacrifice for the beast, culminating May 1. And there's this fact, absolutely nails the fact that the Clintons are powerful, practicing Illuminati witches. With Bill Clinton, what he did while he was in office, and now his wife, Hillary Clinton, is the Secretary of State for the Obama administration, going ahead and being the point person for the trouble in the Middle East, China. The Clinton presidency probably was the most anti-Christian in American history. Clinton himself had been implicated in more crooked deals than any president in history, yet he escaped them all. Yes, every one. I told you one night on A View from Space on Talk Radio AM 640 how the voting went for his impeachment. It was a scam. Clinton was shamed by oral sex in the White House offices with the intern, then lied to the press, lied to the American people, lied to the judge, only to escape total punishment. Clinton had openly cavorted with the West's enemies in those days. And his popularity continued. It soared, as a matter of fact, as his scandals mounted, because the Illuminati mass-controlled media took care of that, giving that view. Seeing Clinton's popularity continue and live through those times, and what happened, way he ran things, you can see I'm stating the obvious. This kind of popularity in the face of seeming disaster is a kind of popularity the Antichrist is going to enjoy, because Bill Clinton is setting up the King of Kings that is coming, because all other kings must fall before this king can take over all of the kingdoms to become one king, one kingdom. So Bill Clinton was allowed to do what he does because he is paving the way for the Antichrist, who will enjoy that kind of popularity also with the people. even though he is doing things openly that should make people sick to their stomach, realizing how disgustingly wicked he really is in his heart of hearts. The only way in which both the Antichrist and this past ex-President Bill Clinton could maintain their popularity in the midst of such open scandal is that they are practicing powerful witchcraft. Clinton is continuing to push his agenda on a wide variety of fronts. He pops up now and again, even though a New York Times online poll listed him as the second most wicked man of the century, right behind Adolf Hitler. I'm not kidding you. I can't make this stuff up, but you know, they do make up polls. But it was in the New York Times. And Clinton's votes on his on his entire presidency is so telling. He was involved in Haiti's rape. He's also in charge of missing children. Did you know that, around the world, who are involved in the sex trade? These actions by the Illuminati government demonstrate just how far down the road the New World Order we really are at this moment in world history. We are very close to staging the Antichrist. Now, according to tradition, Romulus took up his trusty plow, twin of Remus and Romulus, the founders of Rome, and marked out a sulcus around Shepherd's Hill on the 12th day before the calends of May, it's stated in history, a date which, give or take 11 or 12 days, roughly corresponds to what we call today, April 21st, Queen's birthday. Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her birthday today. Conveniently, the date was also the festival of the shepherd goddess Pallas, in whose honor the hill chosen by Romulus had been named the Palatine Hill. Now, anyone who has ever tried to keep a flock of sheep penned up all winter knows that when spring comes, it's really a good idea to do some serious pen cleaning. And while you're at it, you might as well clean out your own house, which no doubt suffered by association with the sheep pens. Better use some sulfur on those sheep, too, who couldn't help but turn a little ripe after being penned up all winter. In a final effort to clear the air, it's also a good idea to get a large quantity of incense and use it to fumigate the entire area. Believe it or not, in ancient times, these were the things that constituted the celebration of the Feast of Pallas, and coincidentally, of the birthday of Rome, because Rome was founded on April 21st, Queen Elizabeth II's birthday, coincidentally, by Romulus in the year 753 BC. And the whole event seems to be a little more than a glorified spring cleaning party. The festival was named for Pallas, a rustic spirit of sprite who haunted the pastures. The main event of the Perilia was to build a fire of straw and hay over which the priests leaped. Originally, this festival was to purify the flock and keep the diseases from spreading. You might equate it with the blessing of the animals in December in some churches today. Some describe it as a ritual purification ceremony in which shepherds and flocks were driven through a fire of blazing straw. That would certainly purify them, not to speak of roasting them at the same time if they weren't fast. It was also an invocation of prosperity for the coming harvest season. Spring would be, as it is with us, the time for planting summer crops. The festival has been likened to Arbor Day, when teachers and students and communities rake public grounds like campus areas and clean up. It's common even today to plant trees or shrubs and look forward to their growth. When the festival was adopted by city dwellers, the date was set to coincide with the date of the traditional founding of Rome, because you see, it was originally just celebrated in the fields and in the countryside, and then moved into the urban areas. Each area of Rome set up festivals, just like a block party. Bonfires set on fire, which offerings were thrown. The event concluded with a bountiful feast set up outdoors. Fire here on Earth represents the sun, who is their god, the life giver to the planet. After all, this show is about our movers and shakers in this world who are sun worshippers. Space, back with more in a moment on Talk Radio, AM 640. New time, a start in the summer, by the way, 8 o'clock in the evening. So if you've just joined me, I have been on for an hour and 20 minutes. I've been talking about Fordicidia, an ancient Roman pagan ritual of blood sacrifices so that the spring planting will give its bountiful harvest in the fall. And I made the comment that we're actually still living through those ancient rituals today because they have manifest themselves in our lives. As I said, Fordicidia, those 13 days beginning April 15th with April 19th, the big day for fire and killing children, which is why I want to talk a little bit more about WACO, the WACO massacre, the untold story, because a lot of people thought that when it was going down that, you know what, these people asked for it. They had guns, they wouldn't give them up. But nobody knows really exactly all of the facts in the case. It was April 18th, as early as Sunday afternoon or evening of that date, April 18, 1993, shortly after a news conference with the then President Bill Clinton, who I'd spoke a little bit about last hour. Calls went into the Parkland Hospital in Dallas, the very same hospital where President Kennedy was taken after his assassination at Dealey Plaza, November 22nd, 1963, again at the hands of CIA professional killers. To be prepared to receive a large number of serious burn victims from Waco the following day. So what happened was the CIA had alerted the hospital, the same one Jack Kennedy went to, that there were going to be possibly a lot of burn victims. So brace yourself, hospital. On the morning of April 19th, 1993, the same Delta Force Commando team, actually a select group of the CIA's top professional killers, which would have carried out what I refer to as the penultimate plan, had been approved, was on the ground in Waco to carry out all aspects of the wet operation planned for that Monday. Now, this mass murder was then to be covered up and made to look like a mass suicide, just like Jonestown, thereby layering one monstrous CIA lie upon another, since both Waco and Jonestown were CIA mass murders and not mass suicides. Now, this Delta Force was composed of 15 men in all, headed by a lieutenant colonel who was a CIA liaison officer. The group flew to Texas on their own C-130 transport plane, landed at the Waco airport, then departed once their dirty work had been completed. The plane belongs to Triangle. Among the 15 men in this larger group, there were two smaller operational teams, the 4-man team unit, which actually makes the insertion into the compound, and a backup team, which apparently was never used. These men, of course, all dressed in black pants, black shoes, black jackets, black masks, gas masks, black gloves. Very poetic for a black or wet operation, and were dressed to look like all the other FBI officers on the ground. Probably even wearing jackets with FBI insignias on them, though I'm not totally certain of that fact. So, to any observer outside, it would have been virtually no way of telling that these men that were wearing these FBI Signia jackets, and all men were dressed the same, but they were actually 4 men that were apart from any of the other federal officers at the scene at the time. The whole North American continent watched on television that morning. April 19th, 1993, as the Illuminati-controlled mass media drew your attention like a magnet to their celebration. That morning, as the FBI used M1A1 tanks to punch holes in the exterior walls of the compound's living quarters. We were later told that at the same time they had battered down these walls. Tanks had also lobbed massive quantities of a very virulent form of tear gas into that compound. This tear gas had been designated for this particular event because it was designed for exactly what they wanted: crowd control. It was a small crowd, but it was great for this type of a situation where it was people that were out in the fresh air, out of doors, because this was a fresh air outdoor situation. These people weren't locked up. They were inside of a compound. It was guaranteed to cause people to flee from its presence simply in order to be able to breathe. That's this type of tear gas used for outdoor crowd control, not indoor. Now it was being used in closed indoor living quarters, also in some situations where 95 men, women, and children were trapped inside. The logical explanation would have been that all 95 of these people would have fled outside immediately, instantly, to get fresh air, just to be able to breathe. But strangely enough, not one single Branch Davidian person came out of that compound, even after this just nuisance substance had been poured into the compound in enormous quantities over a period of several hours. The logical, therefore, arises. You got to ask yourself, why didn't they go out? Why didn't any of these 95 men, women, and children, particularly the women and children, instantly flee into the fresh air, into the open compound? The answer we have been given by the news media and the official FBI spokesman is that David Koresh and his cult members had stockpiled and outfitted themselves with gas masks. The real truth is much more sinister and cold-blooded. Because what actually happened here is that the tear gas, as virulent and such choking effects as it was the only mask or cover for the real active ingredient being propelled by the tanks into that compound. What was actually propelled into that compound was a nerve reagent, a neurotoxin, nerve gas, a virulent, poisonous substance like curare, which instantly paralyzes and renders you totally helpless. And that's why they didn't escape into the open air, because they couldn't move. They were defenseless, all 95 men, women, and children inside the compound, except for those 9 later rescued, like David Thibodeau, who were on the 2nd and 3rd floor with their windows wide open in both sides and were spared a little of the deadly effects of this tear gas, nerve gas combination. For all the others, they couldn't coordinate their muscles in an effort to get enough movement to even get up, much less to run to the life-sustaining fresh air outside, which was only a few feet away. For all the others, they could no longer coordinate it, move. And And that's how they died. Spaceman back with more in a moment on Talk Radio AM 640. Just going a little deeper into the Fordicidia celebrations in modern day, April 19th. Just happened to be talking about the WACO, Texas massacre happening on April 19th. And of course there were others. There was also Hitler, the Warsaw Ghetto, burning and shooting the Jews, the Oklahoma City bombing, Columbine massacre, and the Virginia Tech massacre, all of which have been topic of conversation quite often, gone into each one of those events very in-depth with a completely and totally different story than is presented to you in the Illuminati-controlled mass media, which is used for mind control and brainwashing. You get the truth here. As I'm giving to you now in a little more in-depth, I'm picking Waco and this massacre simply because it was governmental and not a patsy, as Timothy McVeigh was the fall guy for the Oklahoma City bombing, as Sung Hui Cho was the fall guy with others that were never implicated, because he did have help in the Virginia Tech massacre, and of course the fall kids, the fall children, Klebold and Harris. So, as I said, a government operation using the Army. This is an extremely serious matter. The Attorney General then, Janet Reno, well, it meant here was the United States military, the FBI, the Justice Department, directed by the CIA, used nerve gas on innocent men and women and children, on the American civilian population, and then proceeded to murder them in cold blood. This clearly rises to the level of war crimes on a civilian population during peacetime, an unspeakable human rights violation. But it was cheered, as I said. Bill Clinton came off as a hero for sending in the Army and getting rid of these people. It was committed by U.S. intelligence community against innocent men, women, and children, simply to bury the truth concerning the CIA's criminal use of mind control programming to manufacture Manchurian candidate-type robot assassins whose very existence is an unspeakable outrage in and of itself. After this deadly tear gas and nerve gas combination had been spewed on that compound, had time to do its debilitating, paralyzing work on all the men, women, and children in the compound, the four-man Delta Force team I told you about at the start of the hour, actually some of the CIA's top professional assassins, including Lon Horiuchi, who's, yes, he's famous. If you're sitting in front of your Mac or your PC at home listening to A View from Space on Talk Radio AM 640. Some call the best seat in the house. This is the reason why. Lon Horiuchi, one of the shooters, a man who loved his job. They made their entry into the compound. They were dropped onto the roof of the compound by one of several low-flying, heavily armed military choppers which hovered overhead throughout much of that day, while all of the television cameras were focused on the outside of the building at ground level, for example, focusing on the tanks, which had just lobbed the tear gas and nerve gas combination into the building. The actual insertion into the building came at approximately 10:25 in the morning. Yes, that breaks down to an 8, the sun worshippers' number. Before they entered the compound, though, this four-man Delta Force team of assassins received shots of atropine, the antidote to the nerve gas, so that they too would not overcome and be paralyzed by it. According to the testimony given before the Judiciary Committee on the day of that testimony, Attorney General then Janet Reno says the fires in the Branch Davidian compound did not become visible until approximately 11:45 that morning. This means that the team had something in the neighborhood of 1 hour and 15 minutes or so in which they could do their dirty work. And they make their escape. One of the first things they did, obviously, was go into the so-called communications center just off the kitchen, where they found and quickly subdued and killed the leader, David Koresh, along with any of his close associates who were nearby. David Koresh was killed with a single bullet to the middle of the forehead, about an inch above the eyes, fired from a distance of about 4 inches. An article on page A3 of the Washington Post, Tuesday, May 18, 1993, is directly relevant here. It quotes noted forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht of Pittsburgh, who had completed an independent autopsy of the bodies of David Koresh and Steve Schneider, one of his chief lieutenants, as saying that the gunshot wound in the middle of the forehead which killed Koresh and the gunshot wound in the back of the head which killed Schneider are not typical of suicide. I'll repeat that for you. The forensic pathologist said the gunshots in both of these men, the two in command, not typical of people committing suicide. And no wonder they were, in fact, not killed by their own hand at all. This was carefully calculated, carefully planned, and executed cold-blooded mass murder by the Delta Force. From the communications center, the WET team then fanned out throughout the rest of the compound and methodically took out, murdered, all of the other 6 CIA sleepers they would have murdered earlier in what I call the penultimate plan, had that plan been allowed to go forward, plus a number of other persons along the way. The remaining task for this WET team after the multiple murders I've just described had been carried out, while they were still inside, was to place 3 or 4 canisters of Willy Peter. That's the white phosphorus I spoke about earlier, in strategic locations throughout the compound in order to start the fires. Because, you see, fires must also, representing the sun, must also be a part of the sacrificial. Remember, I told you, the cows were burned, then the fetuses were burned, and the ashes scattered on the people for cleanliness, for purification. These canisters were equipped with delayed time devices, all set to go off simultaneously. What an incredible operation this was. And was never reported, of course, as you're hearing it now. Apparently at or on around 11:45 is when the Willy Peter, white phosphorus, its nickname is Willy Peter, is set off. 11:45. If you can write it in your mind's eye, or if you need to write it on a paper, write 11:45. It is a backward 9/11. White phosphorus is one of the most fearsome incendiary devices imaginable. It's one of the favorite of the CIA's WET teams. It ignites instantly, immediately burns with white-hot intensity, consumes beyond all recognition everything in its path. Because it can destroy all possible forensic evidence, it's used a lot. And it covers the trail of the assassins, like this particular WET team, who want to try and claim later that their actual mass murder was merely a mass suicide or a tragic accident. Believe it or not, the world accepted it. CIA wet teams, I don't know if you know this, but they've also been known to corner their intended targets into a closed quarter and then throw Willie Peter into their midst. Here, have some fun. And you thought posing with body parts was ugly. I'm talking about live people here, not dead ones. So these victims, when this Willie Peter hits, are instantly immolated right before the team's eyes. It's one of their best moves. The fire which Willie Peter produces is so intense, and the combustion so complete, you can't identify the victims. Space, back with more. It's Talk Radio, AM 640. Celebrating Fordicidia, as the Illuminati call it. More next. Ancient Rome's great festival of celebration and blood sacrifice, of course, also one big party for planting the seeds in the spring, ending May 1st, a 13-day extravaganza. And of course, we've been celebrating it, whether we like to know it or not, or our attention drawn to it or not. We are celebrating it. In events like, as I've been mentioning all evening, on the 19th especially, Oklahoma City bombing, Columbine massacre, Virginia Tech massacre, they all happened on this same April 19th day, Hitler sending his troops into Warsaw Ghetto. And the one I'm covering, David Koresh, simply going a little deeper into this one and not the others tonight, simply because I don't have time to go into the others, but I have done in the past in those shows when they were happening. And I've picked it because it is an actual government agency that is out in the open doing the murdering, which was passed off as a suicide, horrible accident. But I've been giving you the straight facts here tonight to level with you, to be honest with you on Fordicidia. We're still celebrating it today. I'm trying to make that point. The calendar of chaos keeps on bringing the numbers up, and they keep on executing. And it will not stop until the Antichrist arrives and changes this calendar of chaos into his new one. Now, I left you last break with the fire. Willie Peter producing that heat so intense it just combusts, immolates the victim. But here, because the team itself, the SWAT team, the Delta Force team, was inside the close quarters, they had to use delayed timing devices on the Willie Peter canisters to give themselves time to make their own exit before the entire compound was consumed in that monumental conflagration that everyone watched in horror on television that night. Notice that this explanation of how the fire started comports with the observation on the scene, with what the television cameras at ground level recorded, and with what the military helicopters and their infrared cameras overhead observed. For example, that 3 or 4 fires started simultaneously at different places in the compound. And then these separate fires spread rapidly because of the wood construction, the straw which was everywhere, the high winds, the white-hot Willie Peter, incendiary devices which had started these separate blazes in the first place, until they became united into a one cohesive whole involving the entire compound, all captured on television for the viewer. You became a participant in the celebration of Fordicidia of 1993, April 19th, if you watched. And this fire became more destructive than the sum of the separate smaller fires until it ultimately became a massive conflagration which consumed everything in sight. One possible contrary explanation which has been offered by critics and the tragic accident theory advocates that the tear gas sprayed into the compound by the tanks, ignoring the fact that what was injected was not just tear gas, but a tear gas nerve gas combination, was itself a combustible substance. That one of the tanks, in punching holes in the exterior walls, had accidentally knocked over a kerosene lantern or container, and that the kerosene had then ignited the tear gas, which resulted in this conflagration. Can you believe that weak excuse? It was broadcast globally, believed by many. Millions cheered Bill Clinton for making the decision to send in the Delta Force to wipe them out. The other point to be made here is that the wet team did kill many of those inside the compound prior to setting the fires by the means of the Willie Peter canisters on delayed timing devices. They apparently did not murder, at least directly, all of the 86 men and women and children who ultimately died in that tragedy, meaning that many of those who died were left paralyzed by the nerve gas, unable to get up or free themselves from this disaster in progress, and so were consigned to, yes, just like the fetuses inside of the cows at Fordicidia, the original celebration, consumed alive by the fire brought on by the white phosphorus. And those that succumbed, that were consigned to this horrible, fiery fate, being burned alive, apparently included men, women, and, yes, children. You want today's equivalent? Okay. The Pakistan air crash. Victims were said to include 11 children. I don't know if you've heard, but Pakistan had a plane crash. 72 bodies have been recovered. A Boeing 737 flown from Karachi crashes on its approach to the airport during a storm, we're told. Just on the outskirts of Islamabad. But you know what everyone's saying in the Western world? So what? They're Pakistani. They're aiding Al-Qaeda. They hid bin Laden, didn't tell us. Who cares? That's the feeling you get. All carefully occulted, hidden in the celebration of Fordicidia. The sacrifice beginning April 15th through May 1. So the bottom line at Waco, Texas here is that 86 men, women, and children died, murdered, in that Branch Davidian compound on that Monday, April 19th, 1993. All of the hands of the 4 members of the CIA wet team operating under cover of the Delta Force were the ones responsible. The bottom line is also that the high-ranking officials in the U.S. government, Attorney General then Janet Reno, President Bill Clinton then, including senior Reagan and Bush administration holdovers in the Justice Department, the FBI, the BATF, the Pentagon, and the CIA all knew in advance of this Waco operation. It was designed from the start to be a mass murder in which only those few individuals whom the CIA had targeted in advance to be saved would be allowed to survive, and that all of the other 86 men, women, and children in the compound would be murdered in cold blood by these CIA Delta Force assassins. One of the uses CIA makes of its mind control sophistication is to implant memory blocks into the subconscious memories of its top professional assassins in order to allow them to live with what they've done and not to be overcome by flashbacks and nightmares of their handiwork, to have what they call post-traumatic distress, as they say with the boys coming back from Iraq, Iran, Vietnam, Korea, WW2. Well, I've been informed that those memory blocks are not holding very well in this instance, and that some of, or all four of the members of this particular WET team are sickened by what they were ordered to do and what they did, in fact, accomplish in WACO on April 19th of 93. To these hardened, seasoned professional assassins, it was all too easy. The people inside the compound, as a result of the nerve gas, simply never had a chance. Lon Horiuchi was one. The Illuminati would desire to place a man whom they control in the group being sacrificed, most preferably a Manchurian candidate, a man whom they've had previously programmed by mind control to willingly die for their Illuminati cause. That was David Koresh. He was just the man for the job. All the numbers are there. Koresh was 33 years old. The Messiah, 33. Finishing his ministry. Spaceman, AM 640, and a View from Space returns in a moment. I've been talking to him the first couple of hours about Fordicidia. It's that time of year again. Because this calendar of chaos that we have running our lives, it's like get on a city bus, it hits the same stops all the time, doesn't it? This calendar does the same thing for the Illuminati to follow their plan. It all comes from ancient Babylon, then Rome. In Rome, magical practice was rife among the Romans. Magic was the motive power for their worship, which was simply an organized system of magical rites for communal ends. It was the basis of their mode of thought and outlook on the world. It entered into every moment and action of their daily life, just like you. It affected their laws. It affected their customs. I'm talking about magic practice. Magic is being performed on you. You are brainwashed through the media. Television shows get you to react a certain prescribed way. Let's take something really simple. Debt. Today, debt is normal. But it didn't start out to be like that. People did this. What they're trying to force everyone to do now in all of the countries around the world in the same plan. Live within your means. That's the way it's supposed to be. If you cannot afford something, you cannot have it. But along came plastic in the 60s and they said, hey, it's just like money. I know you don't have any money, but this gives you the power as if you had money. And you go into debt. And gold is not the power of money. Debt is. Once they get a hold of you through debt, they can call the tune. They're taking country over after country over in this way now. So debt is not normal, but you, at the beginning of this conversation, just a couple of minutes ago, thought debt was normal. It's not. And now people are going, what? We have to actually live within our means now? Yes, you always had to, but you fell for the trick. you're being taken over. It's brainwashing. This ingrained tendency, magic, instead of diminishing, developed into an enormous extent into a great system of superstition. In the later years, this form of thought, this magic, led to a frenzy of strange gods borrowed from other countries, other cultures. In times of misfortune and disaster, the Romans were always ready to borrow a god if so be his favors promised more than those of their own deities. Though there was a strong conservative element in the native character, though the custom of the elders was strongly upheld by the priestly fraternity, yet this usually gave way before the will and temper of the people. So, as a rock shows its geological history by its differing strata, so the theogony of the Roman gods tells its tale of the race who conceived it. There are prehistoric nature deities borrowed from the indigenous tribes, gods of the Sabines, from whom the young colony stole its wives, gods, the Etruscans, of the Egyptians, Greeks and Persians. The temple of Jupiter on the Capitol contained the altar of a primitive deity, a stone god named Terminus, the spirit of boundaries. And if you're listening to me in Quebec now, Terminus, we all know, is written on every bus at the end of the stop. Hey, the end of the line, Terminus. It's French for the end of the line in the buses in Quebec. Or if you're a French person listening to me in Manitoba. Yes, Terminus, the spirit of boundaries, in the temple of Diana of the Grove, a fountain nymph was worshipped. Instances of this description are all over. Spirits, in addition to these gods, were spirits to be adored, deified. The objects offered to the Roman for adoration were numberless. Apuleius gives us a description of this when he tells of a country road where one might meet an altar wreathed with flowers, a cave hung with garlands, an oak tree laden with horns of cattle, a hill marked by fences as sacred, a log rough hewn into shape, an altar of turf smoking with libations, or a stone anointed with oil. Every single action of man's life had a presiding spirit. Commerce, husbandry. There was eating Ednia, drinking Potina. There were spirits of departure, of journeying, of approaching, of homecoming. In commerce, there was Mercurius, the spirit of gain, of money. Pecunia, in farming, the spirits of cutting, grinding, sowing, and beekeeping. See, every facet, every level, every strata of life, a god presided over. A deity presided over streets and highways. There was a goddess of the sewers. Cloacina was her name, the spirit of bad smells. Mephitis, spirit of evil, also must be deified and pacified with certain rituals and rites, such as Robigo, the spirit of mildew. In Rome, there was an altar to fever and bad fortune. From the country came Silvanus, god of farms and woods, and his fauns and nymphs with Picus, the woodpecker god who had fed the twins Romulus and Remus with his berries. All these were possessed of influences and were approached with peculiar ritual rites. The name of these spirits were inscribed on tablets or written on walls, which were in charge of the pontiffs, who would then, knowing each spirit, would evoke according to the need. Most of these spirits were like animistic in origin. The Roman worship was made up of magical rites destined to deify the powers controlling mankind, to bring man into touch with them, to renew his life and that which supported it, the land with its trees, the corn that he ate, the cattle he drank the milk from and ate the beef from. To stop that process of regeneration constantly set in motion by evil influences, everything connected with it typified this restoration. The priests who represented the life of the community were therefore bound by strict observances from endangering it in any way. They had to abide by the ritualistic rules. As to attire, eating and touching were numerous. Sacrifices were systematically put in order according to the end desired and the deity invoked. Space back with more. And the magical world of Rome. Next on Talk Radio AM 640. Now, with these sacrifices to these deities, you can't just kill anything. There were rules, still are, as to whether the victim is young, full-grown, male, female. For instance, oxen were to be offered to Jupiter and Mars. Juno, yes, in Canada we have the Juno Awards, named after this god. That is musical excellence here in Canada, our Juno Award. Well, Juno demanded pigs to be slaughtered. Also did Ceres, the corn goddess, and also Sylvanus. At one shrine, a cow in calf was sacrificed, and the ashes of the unborn were of special magical potency. Human sacrifice existed within historical times. After the Battle of Cannae, the Romans wanted to divert misfortune by burying a couple of Greeks alive in the cattle market, while in the time of Julius Caesar, a couple of men were put to death with sacrificial solemnities by the pontiff and the Flamen of Mars. Again, in the time of Cicero and Horace, boys were killed for magical purposes. Fire also possessed great virtue and was held sacred in the worship of Vesta. An earlier belief, Vesta being the fire itself. It presided over the family hearth. It restored purity and conferred protection. Blood had the same quality, and smeared on the face of the god symbolized and brought about the oneness of the deity with the community. On great occasions, the statue of Jupiter was treated this way. The priests of Bologna made incisions in their shoulders and sprinkled the blood on the image. The face of a triumphant general was painted with vermilion to represent blood. Kneeling and bending over brought one into direct contact with the earth of the sacred place. Music was also used as a way for incantation to call the demon to your sacrifice, probably getting its origin in sound made to drive away evil spirits. You could also make sounds that would make them come. Dancing, too, had a magical effect. In Rome, there were colleges of dancers for the purposes of religion only. young people who danced in solemn measure about the altars, who in the sacred month of Mars took part in the festivals and went through the city dancing and singing. One source actually states 4 kinds of holy solemnity: sacrifice, sacred banquets, public festivals, and games, of course. Theatrical performances also belonged to this category. I don't think that people would put up with the sacrifice unless the games accompanied them. You have to have a little fun. So the games were necessary to keep the people's attention, I believe. As I said, theatrical performances also belong to this category. Public festivals. 4 kinds of holy solemnity on 4 ways on how to appease the gods. The sacred banquets were often decreed by the Senate, the Roman Senate, as thanksgiving to the gods. Tables were spread with sumptuous meals in the public places and were first offered to the statues of the deities seated around. And the festivals were numerous, too, all of a magical and symbolic nature. In the spring, there was the Perilia, when fires of straw were lighted. It ends Fordicidia. Perilia ends Fordicidia. I will touch on it before the conclusion of tonight's show, through which persons passed through this fire to be purified. Perilia. The Cerealia, celebrated with sacrifice and offerings to Ceres, the corn goddess, followed by banquets. The Lupercalia, the festival of Faunus, was held in February. It symbolized the awakening of spring and growth. Goats were slain as sacrifice with their blood. The Luperci, youths clad in skins, smearing their faces with the blood. They took thongs of the goat skin and laughingly, wildly rushed through the city, striking the crowd with them. Roman matrons believed that the blows, if you got hit by them, rendered them prolific, made them more powerful. Juno, the goddess of marriage and childbirth, also had her festival, the Matronalia, celebrated by women of Rome. There were the festivals of the dead, when the door leading to the other world was opened, the stone removed from its entrance in Cymedium, and the shades coming forth were appeased with offerings. On these days, 3 times in the year, when the gods of gloom were abroad, complete cessation from all work was decreed. No work. No battle could be fought. No ship could sail. And no man could marry. Time stood still, it stopped. So, you see, to the sacred games, all eyes were to be on them. And were taken in the statues of the gods in gorgeous procession too. Chariots of silver, companies of priests. It's sort of like them throwing a party and saying, hey, you got the day off, so hey, get out there, Canada Day, same deal. Or, hey, it's the 4th of July in America. Or, it's the Queen's Jubilee if you're listening to me in Britain. Get an extra banking holiday this year. It's going to cost them even more. The chariot races also were part of the nature of these sacrificial rites and celebrations. After all, it kept the crowd interested also. After the races in the field of Mars came one of the most important Roman rites, the sacrifice of the October horse. That's the right-hand horse of the victorious team that was sacrificed to Mars, and the tail of the animal running with blood carried to the altar of the Regia. The blood was stored in the temple of Vesta, till the following spring and used in the sacrifices of the festival of Perilia, which ends Fordicidia, near May 1st, right at the end, April 30th. This sacrifice was essentially magical. All citizens present being looked upon as purified by the blood sprinkling and the lustral bonfire that was created. The Roman outlook upon life was totally immersed by magic and controlled by it. You think they were pagans and they were kind of, shall we say, backward? No, you're doing the same thing today. They're doing the exact same thing. We have the same holidays. You do the same routines in those holidays. The calendar of chaos is still operating, as it always has. It's a Spaceman, Talk Radio, AM 640. A View from Space returns after this. Speaking about this very, very potent time of year between April 15th, May 1st, Fordicidia, closing with the Perilia on the 30th. In ancient Rome, everything had a god or a goddess. And even in the heavens, strange things might be seen. The sun had been known to double, even treble itself. Its light turned to blood, or a magical halo to appear around the orb. Thunder and lightning were always around with meaning. Jove was angered when he opened the heavens and hurled his bolts to earth. Phantoms, too, hovered amid the clouds. A great fleet of ships had been seen sailing over the marshes. On the Campuaga, the gods were observed in conflict, and afterwards tracks of the combatants were visible across the plain. Unearthly voices were heard amid the mountains and groves. Cries sounded within the temples. Blood haunted the Roman imagination. I think it haunts the imagination of the Western world with all of its entertainment, motion pictures, and its supposed real-life drama in the daily news, television. I believe we see more blood now than the ancient Romans did. Yes, blood haunted the Roman imagination as it haunts us today. Sometimes it was said to have covered the land as a mantle. The standing corn was dyed with blood. The rivers and fountains flowed with it. White walls and statues were covered with the bloody sweat. The fight and song of birds might be foretelling the decrees of fate. Yes, just the flight of a flock of birds going by would mean something. And woe to the person who saw that, who believed it, were then under the spell of it. Unappeased spirits of the dead were known to walk, lurk near, and steal away the souls of men. And then they, too, were dead. All these happenings were attributable to the gods and spirits who, if the portent be one of menace, must be deified and must be appeased. If one of good fortune thanked with offerings, down to the later times as deep belief in the occurrence of prodigies persisted. When Otho set out for Italy, Rome rang with reports of a gigantic phantom rushing forth from the temple of Juno, of the state of Julius, turning from east to west. Yes, they actually said the bust of Julius turned in the temple of Juno. Augury, it's divination. It was connected with the Roman worship too. There was a spot on the Capitol from which the augur with veiled head read the auspices and the flight of birds. Augurs were people who told the future, also accompanied armies and fleets and read the omens before an engagement was entered upon. Divination was also practiced by reading the intestines of animals, by dreams, by divine possession, as in the case of the oracles when prophecies were uttered. These were all gathered up together in what they called the Sibylline books, and were consulted as oracles by the state, with a worship of fortune, or connect with lots of parents. The questions put to the goddess were answered by means of an oaken lot, which a boy drew from a case made of sacred wood, oak wood. The fortune tellers also used a narrow-necked urn which, filled with water, only allowed one lot at a time to rise up. Astrologers from Chaldea were also much sought after, and were attached to the kingly and noble houses only, so they could guide the entire country. Familiar things of everyday life were of magical import. Words, numbers, odd ones, especially for the calendars. Nons and ides were so arranged as to fall upon odd days, and touch was binding, and so recognized in the law of Rome as the grasp of a thing sold from a slave to a turf of distant estate, and knotting and twisting of thread was injurious, so that women must never pass by cornfields twisting their spindles. They must not even be uncovered. There was a strange sympathy between the trees and mankind, and great honor was paid to these sacred trees of Rome, oak being the most sacred. Do you know all of the great medals in combat have oak leaves ever since the beginning of time? In the oak tree of Jupiter, the triumphant general hung the shield and arms of his fallen foe, while the hedges about the temple of Diana at Nemi were covered with votive offerings. The trees also harbored the spirits of the dead who came out as dreams to the souls of men. Pliny the Elder says, "Trees have a soul, since nothing on earth lives without one." There are the temples of spirits, and the simple countryside dedicates still a noble tree to some god. The various kinds of trees are sacred to their protecting spirits. The oak, protective to Jupiter; the laurel, to Apollo; the olive tree to Minerva; the myrtle tree to Venus; the white poplar to Hercules. These trees took their part of the nature of the presiding spirits, and it was desirable to bring about communion with their magical influences. In spring, when laurel boughs were hung at the doors of the flamens and pontiffs, and in the temple of Vesta, where they remained hanging until the following year. Trees and their leaves were also possessed of healing and purifying power. Laurel was used for the latter quality, as in the Roman triumphs. The fasces of the commander, the spears and javelins of legionnaires, were wreathed with its branches to purify them from the blood of the enemy. Man himself had a presiding spirit, his genius, each woman her Juno. The Saturnalia was really a holiday for this other self. where you could flip over and be that other self. You see, in Saturnalia, if you were with me over the winter near Christmas, when I talk about Saturnalia, you will know, if you have been in the past years, you will know that ritual. What happens in Saturnalia is exactly how you act in the new year. Happy New Year! Everything's going crazy. The Roman kept his birthday in honor of his genius, offering frankincense, cakes, and unmixed wine on an altar garland with flowers, making solemn prayers for the coming year. City and villages had their genies, all bodies of men from the Senate to the scullions. And death was believed to be the life and soul enticed away by revengeful ghosts. So, death would never occur save such agencies. If you had the demon, the spirit, the god, if you appeased the god, you'd be all right. The dead, therefore, must be appeased with offerings, or else they wander around working evil among the living. What a prison. This belief is present in Ovid's lines. You can hear it. Here's a line. Once upon a time, the great feast of the dead was not observed, and the manes failed to receive the customary gifts, the fruit, the salt, corn steeped in unmixed wine, the violets. The injured spirits revenged themselves on this living group, and the city was encircled with the funeral fires of their victims. The townsfolk heard their grandsires complaining in the quiet hours of the night, and told each other how the unsubstantial troop of monstrous specters rising from their tombs shrieked along the city streets and up and down the fields. Beans were used in the funeral feasts. Yes, they were supposed to honor the harbor the souls of the dead, and the bean blossom was to be inscribed with characters of mourning. Dreams were considered of great importance too by the Romans. More on that when I return on Talk Radio, AM 640. It's just a view from space. That's all it is. RL writes, hey, Space, long-time listener. Too many years to remember. I've always liked your show and found it entertaining and thought-provoking, which has led to many interesting conversations. I guess that's what keeps me tuning in. I actually look at world events and the basic news with a different view now. Call it the Gary filter. Anyway, I missed the first couple of hours on the show tonight, so I don't know if you mentioned a couple of recent events that have struck me, and I just can't shake them. For instance, last week there was a series of devastating tornadoes in the United States, typically destructive in Tornado Alley, widespread from the Gulf right up through Illinois, Iowa, Oklahoma. Nothing new, except the people in power announced 2 or 3 days in advance that there would be devastating, life-taking tornadoes, not just thunderstorms. Strongly worded warnings very far in advance, because you see, they were caused by chemtrailing and HARP. This is not in the email. I'm just explaining it right now. And this is in those days of Fordicidia. Men, women, and children are killed. Now, of course, he goes on to say, that got me thinking about HARP and a planned test, hence the early warning. The media did make a big deal about an early announcement, but of course it's all dropped. The second event was the rise of Tupac on stage, rapping with Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre. How weird is that? This holograph is so lifelike looking. If you didn't know the guy was dead, you would think he was really there. Of course, this leads to the idea you present, aliens making contact. It will be a holograph contact, and we will all be fooled. When I saw that clip of Tupac on stage, it made my skin crawl. Like I said, these two events have stuck with me. Longtime Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada listener. RL. Pales is a mysterious deity, or deities. The Romans actually themselves weren't really sure as to his or her exact sex even. So he was treated as androgynous, both sex, he and she. It's the patron of shepherds, Pales, and is the scholiast, as the Pallas mutata. The name relates to phallus, meaning penis. The festival date, April 21st, re-invoked with these events through history. On April 21st today, 753 BC, Romulus founds Rome. 43 BC, Mark Antony is defeated by Consul Horatius in the Battle of Mutina, who is killed. 1836, Battle of San Jacinto. Texas forces under Sam Houston defeat and capture Lopez de Santa Anna. And 1863, Ba'ulhu is proclaimed as the head of the Baha'i faith. 1898, Spanish-American Civil War. The United States Congress, April 25th, recognizes that a state of war exists between the United States of America and Spain as of that date, April 21st. 1912, April 21st, New York Giants, New York Yankees play an exhibition game to benefit survivors of the Titanic, which I covered last week. Yes, it's all in this Fordicidia blood sacrifice time, the 13 days before May 1st. 1953, the year of Queen Elizabeth's coronation. Also on that date connected with a witch hunt. It was also known as McCarthyism. Roy Cohn, G. David Schein, a couple of senators, Joseph McCarthy's chief aides, as a matter of fact, recommend the removal of 30,000 books from the libraries of the United States Information Services posts in Europe, including works by Danshell Hammett, Dubois, Herman Melville, John Steinbeck, Henry David Thoreau, calling them all pro-communist. In 1970, Hutt River Province secedes from the Commonwealth of Australia. I know I have some Aussie listeners. 1975, April 21st, Vietnam War. President of South Vietnam, Van Thieu, flees Saigon as Xuan Loc, the last South Vietnamese outpost blocking a direct North Vietnamese assault on Saigon, falls. 1994, April 21st, today, the first discovery of extrasolar planets are announced by astronomer Alexander Voltsan. Palais was honored on April 21st on all those events that happened on this day. In the agricultural festival, Perilia, when she was invoked to purify and protect the flocks. For the Perilia, the sheepfold had to be cleaned with water and swept pre-dawn on this day. It was decorated with leafy branches and a wreath placed over the entrance. The sheep were fumigated with sulfur, and then an olive and pine wood fire was lit, and laurel branches set on it. See, certain woods, certain trees. The shepherd offered millet cakes, food, and milk, and then prayed to Palais for forgiveness in case she had unwittingly allowed his flock, her flock, to graze on holy ground that had cut sacred wood from or soiled holy water, and protection from disease from wolves. Facing east, the shepherd offered his prayer 4 times and then washed his hand in dew on the ground, the wetness in the grass. Then the shepherd would drink a combination of milk and heated wine from a bowl and then leap through the bonfire. Then he would have his flock leap the fire as well. This ritual was performed both privately and publicly. The rest of the day was conducted in pleasant feasting and drinking, and people throughout the city would jump over bales of burning hay. He or she, Palais, is known also by a few other names. Palace Mutata, Pastoria Palace. Sacred rites were performed in Rome on April 21st. Cattle driven through bonfires on that day. Another festival to Palais, apparently dedicated to the two Palais, Palibus Dubos in Latin, was held on July 7th. Marcus Atilius Regulus built a temple to Pallas in Rome following his victory over the Salentini in 267 BC. It's generally thought to have been located on the Palatine Hill, but being a victory monument, it may have been located on the route of the triumphal procession, either on the Campus Martius or the Aventine Hill. This time of year, in all calendars you and I call April, has had a tremendous amount of influence on all religious holidays and aspects of those religions around the world in every single culture. Why? Because the Illuminati's controlling families throughout history have set it in stone, as they say, and we repeat it. It's part of the great work, which is to set up the highest-ranking bloodline member of the House of Cain in command of a one-world government system with one religion. Just listen. Legends and lore for April. It's the fourth month of the Gregorian calendar, the second month of spring's rule. It gets its name from Aprilis, the Latin name for the ancient Roman love goddess Aphrodite. Now, if you're into motorcycles, this is where the name of the bike manufacturer Aprilia comes from. Just bought by Volkswagen last week, by the way. They also own Lamborghini now. They also own Porsche. The Germans are doing quite well, thanks. They're in Buckingham Palace. What do you think? Other sources for the goddess of Aprilis gives the name Apertiti, the Latin word meaning to open, as the origination of the name that's given to a motorcycle brand and other things in our world, making sure it never dies and lives on, influencing through the ages. The traditional birthstone amulet of April is the diamond, and the daisy and the sweet pea are the month's traditional flowers. April's shared by astrological signs of Aries, the ram, Taurus, the bull, and is sacred to the pagan deities Aphrodite, Artemis, Astarte, Erzuli, Terra, Venus, Yinghua. Hey, guess what? They're all the same deity. Different names, different cultures. I'm going to break down the whole month of April as it affects the world in this final hour. The whole month of April of blood sacrifices as done in different countries. And it's not all blood sacrifices either. Some of it's quite interesting on what other countries do. But all are in lockstep at this time of year at Space Talk Radio, AM 640. Back in a moment with a view from space. I set up this hour really with the last couple of minutes of the last hour when I was speaking about how this time of year, as in all calendars, April, has a tremendous influence on all religious holidays and aspects of those religions around the world in every single culture. In other words, in unison, knowing it or not, in different cultures, they're all actually celebrating the same thing in different ways. Here's how the month of April affects the world. April 1st, the month of Venus, begins with April Fool's Day. Known as All Fool's Day, an occasion for playing practical jokes, right? This custom dates back to the old times, the old days when inmates of insane asylums were allowed out in the street for one day each year for the sadistic amusement of those who were supposedly normal. They changed the calendar, you see, and anyone that didn't want to go along with the new dates and still stuck by the old dates was an April Fool. Get it? go with the new calendar or be called a fool. And it just happened to be April Fool, because that's when the calendar was changed. So they would say, no, it's still April. And they go, no, we've moved on. It's not April anymore, you idiot. We've changed the calendar. Well, I don't believe the old calendar. Well, you're an April Fool. And that's where that started. April 2nd, the old pagan custom of carrying death away is carried out in certain regions of Germany on this day, in celebration of winter's demise. Special straw dolls are burned in sacred bonfires or drowned in sacred wells. April 2nd. April 3rd in Iran, or April 3rd, falls on the 13th day of their new year. Special bowls containing sprouted seeds are traditionally cast into the rivers as offerings in the belief that the bad luck of the previous year will be carried away. The goddess of Persephone's annual return from the underworld, allowing the earth to bloom again, remember, was celebrated every year on this date by the ancient Romans. Seeds. Persephone had pomegranate seeds. That's how she escaped. April 4th, the annual festival of Cybele, the Megalesia, was celebrated on this day in ancient Rome. She was a goddess of fertility whose cult originated in Phrygia. Her male attendants were self-castrated priests and worshipped her, and they were wild and orgiastic about it. April 5th, the festival of Kuan Yin. Every year on this day, Kuan Yin, the powerful Chinese goddess of healing, mercy, compassion, and forgiveness, is called on for protection, love, mercy, and wisdom, offering up of incense and violet-colored candles placed on the altar, along with wishes and prayers that are written and rolled up on pieces of rice paper by the people, chained to their customs of ritual. April 6th, in France, a children's springtime festival happens on this day, April 6th in France. Miniature pine boats, each holding a burning candle, are put into the estuaries in the Moselle River to symbolize the sea of life and the happiness of sailing the sacred waves. April 7th, the Blaginini, or kindly ones, are celebrated annually on this day at various parts of Romania. This is a sacred day in which offerings are made to the beneficial spirits of water and the beneficial spirits of the underworld. And then, of course, the day I spoke about not long ago, the Day of the Masters, April 8th. Day of the Masters in ancient Babylon was the first day of the new year of ancient Babylon, as Ishtar, the goddess, slept with the king, and if she enjoyed the tryst on the eve of Master's Day, he became the king again for another year. If not, he was disposed of and the new king was chosen. And if there were children involved, which there were, they became the holy royal priests and were also the bloodline that was contained. They went out to be all of the ancient Roman emperors. On this date in 1994, a group of pagans carrying placards, banners, balloons, and streamers paraded joyously through Gainesville, Florida. They praised the mother goddess and invited all to celebrate the beauty of life. The focus of this freedom? Burning bales of hay. April 8th, Gainesville, Florida, Day of the Masters. Yes, burning bales of hay of religion parade. It's sponsored by the Alachua Pagan Alliance. And it was done to highlight the religious diversity of the community and to help foster tolerance of other religions, as the slow transformation of the world's religions are melded into one by the Illuminati's controlled little pockets, little groups. April 9th, Feast of Amma. Once a year on this day, the ancient goddess Amma is honored with a religious festival in the Portuguese territory of Macau. That's where the Steve Wynn has built all of his casinos in Macau. Amma is the patroness of fishermen and all those who sail the sea. This day is sacred to all Amazon goddesses, April 9th. In England, a Hocktide festival happens on this date each year, April 9th, to celebrate the triumph of the Saxon she-warriors who battled against Danish invaders in the year 1002. April 10th, according to Celtic folklore, the sun dances each year on this day. Many parts of Ireland, people wake up in the first light of dawn to watch the sun dance in a shimmering bowl of water. Bao, the goddess mother of Ea, was honored each day on this day in ancient Babylonia with a sacred religious festival called the Day of Bao. April 11th, on this day each year, cross-inscribed loaves of bread are traditionally baked in honor of the Roman goddess Diana. In Greece, branches of evergreen, myrtle, or bay were worn by children, on this day for protection against the venomous evil eye. In Armenia, the goddess Anahit is honored annually on this day with a sacred festival. She's the deity of both love and lunar power, who dwells within the silver light of the moon. April 12th, well, of course, the Cerealia, covered here already on A View from Space, Talk Radio AM 640, an annual festival of the goddess Ceres, celebrated by the ancient Romans in order to secure the fertility of the crops. The sacred rites of Ceres began on this date, where observed for 8 consecutive days. Yes, the sun worshippers number. In Taiwan, the goddess who presides over birth, Chu Si Nui, is honored annually on this day with a religious festival. Pregnant women go to temples dedicated to her in order to receive blessings for their unborn children. April 13th, on this day, an annual festival of water is celebrated by Buddhists in Thailand. Buddhist statues are ritually bathed, and the water is thrown on the faithful to purify and wash away the evil spirits of that previous year. The festival lasts for 3 consecutive days, the royal number. April 14th, according to an ancient belief, the 14th day of April is a very unlucky time to travel, especially on water, say by ship. I needn't remind you. Well, maybe I have to if you don't know your history or you did not listen to last week's show here. April 14th, 1912, was the date the ocean liner Titanic collided with the iceberg and sank to the bottom of the sea a few short hours later. So this Titanic tragedy was perpetrated then on that very day and served to reinforce this notion of it's very unlucky to travel by water. April 14th. Space, back with more. Talk Radio AM 640 in a moment. One of my biker buddies, PM, writes, hey, Space, I believe Ducati was bought by the Germans. Not sure if I heard you say Aprilia. And you're absolutely correct. I had the right country, wrong motorcycle company. It was Ducati, just been eaten up by Volkswagen. I get a little excited around those two-wheel monsters. Now, continuing the April, what should I call, magical spell around the world in all the religions. I believe I left off with April 14th with the Titanic. April 15th, in ancient Rome, the earth goddess Tellus, or Tellus Mater, was honored annually on this day. Here in Canada, we have a telephone company, cell phone company, that is a provider, and is keeping that name alive. A pregnant cow was traditionally sacrificed at her sacred festival. And the unborn calf, of course, as I explained earlier, burned in a bonfire to ensure the fertility of the crops. In Japan on this day, the festival of the Iron Phallus, the Kanamara Matsuri, is celebrated annual in Kawasaki City, Japan. Now, see, I'm getting excited already with a kawi. The ancient Japanese deities associated with sexuality and human reproduction give their sacred blessings and encouragement on this day, especially to couples who wed late in life, or to men, say, who suffer from erectile dysfunction. April 16th, every year on this day, the god Apollo was worshipped and supplicated by his faithful cult in ancient Greece. An annual festival called the Hecateria was celebrated in his honor. On this date in the year 1946, pagan author Margot Adler was born in Little Rock, Arkansas. Her Wiccan hand-fasting, as you call it, wedding, on June 19th, 1988, was the very first all-time ever neo-pagan wedding to appear in the New York Times Society pages. April 17th, in the Himalayan kingdom of Nepal, an annual religious event called the Chariot Festival of the Rain God begins on this day. It's dedicated to Makhenra, the ancient and powerful Indian god of rain. Festival celebrated for 8 consecutive weeks. Yes, no matter where you go, the sun worship number is 8. April 18th, the very next day, the festival of Rama Navami is celebrated at sacred shrines throughout India. It honors both the great Hindu god Rama, the 7th incarnation of Vishnu, by the way, and the goddess Sita. There are 10 incarnations of Vishnu, if you aren't up to speed on the Hindu religion. The final one, called Kalki, which means eternity or time, or the destroyer of foulness, is expected to appear at the end of the Kali Yuga, which is the time period in which we currently live. So the Hindus are expecting the last incarnation of Vishnu to appear on the earth. It means eternity, time, or the destroyer of foulness. This avatar, I believe, will appear as a religious savior. As all religious saviors are portrayed in the world's different cultures, because it'll be one savior who comes for all of these religions that are melding together, is said to arrive, this final 10th incarnation of Vishnu, like every other culture. He is said to arrive seated on a white horse with a drawn sword blazing like a comet. Where have you heard that before? In just about every other religion. He shall come finally to destroy the wicked, to restart the new creation and restore the purity of conduct in people's lives. He's called the Antichrist on A View from Space on Talk Radio, AM 640. April 19th, the day I talked about quite a lot, the first 2 hours of the show. On this date, 1824, Lord Byron, whose real name was George Gordon, died of a fever. He's an English poet who was known for dabbling in the occult arts. Actually, he knew a lot about it. He helped shape Mary Shelley and her character Frankenstein, and gave John Polidori the idea for his novel The Vampire. So you can get an idea where Lord Byron was at. Lord Byron's heart, by the way, was removed from his corpse. Did you know this? And buried in Greece. The rest of his remains were shipped back to England. April 20th, Hitler's birthday. On this date, approximately the sun enters the astrological sign of Taurus. Persons born under the sign of the bull are said to be stable, reliable, patient, and often stubborn. Taurus is an earth sign. It's ruled by the planet Venus. April 21st, birth of Rome. On this day, an annual festival called the Paralia, Feast of the Pallas, was celebrated in ancient Rome to honor the pastoral goddess Pallas. I covered this just an hour ago. In the country, special purification rites were performed to keep the sheep disease-free. Shepherds, followed by their flock, would traditionally leap through bonfires. In the city of Rome, the festival is celebrated with wine and merriment. A big party. April 22. It's now the date chosen to celebrate Earth Day. Yes, this is a day dedicated to Mother Earth and a time for witches throughout the world to perform Gaia healing rituals. The first Earth Day happened in 1970 as a result of the ecology movement of that time, and since then it's been held each year to promote, brainwash, encourage recycling programs and the use of solar energy, and to increase community awareness of environmental concerns. April 22. April 23, the Vinalia, a joyous wine festival in honor of the god Jupiter, held annually on this date in ancient Rome. April 23. On this date in 1934, Shirley MacLaine was born. Her best-selling spirituality books have had a major influence in the neo-pagan movement and have made her name synonymous with New Age. On this date in 76, April 23, the first national all-women's conference on women's spirituality was held in a rented church in Boston, Mass. Several hundred women attended the event. They proclaimed, "The goddess is alive, magic is afoot," and invoked her by dancing, clapping, and chanting. The conference lasted for 3 consecutive days. April 24th, St. Mark's Eve. According to folklore of the English countryside, the ghosts of all men, women, and children destined to pass away in the next year can be seen floating by on this night by any person brave enough to spend the night awake in front of the porch of a church watching. But if a person was unfortunate enough to fall asleep during the vigil, or if he failed to repeat it annually for the remainder of his life, if he started, then he would never wake up the next morning. Just so controlling. These rituals are so binding. April 25. On this date in the year 1989, USA Today, owned by the Gannett Company, the largest U.S. newspaper publisher as measured by total daily circulation, reported that Patricia Hutchins, a military Wiccan stationed at Air Force Base in Texas, was granted religious leave by the United States military in order to observe the 8 Sabbats of the Wicca religion. Ms. Hutchins was the first Wiccan in history to have her religious holidays granted by the United States Air Force. USA Today, by the way, reported the story, vies with the Wall Street Journal for the position of having the widest circulation of any newspaper in the States. The Illuminati indeed control all. Space. Back with more on Talk Radio, AM 640 after the break. Left off on the 25th of April, almost through the month here, or going around the world. What an incredible effect this month of sowing the seeds to reap the benefits of the gods you're doing the ritual for. April 26th, and this New Year's Day, by the way, in the African Republic of Sierra Leone, an ancient seed-sowing ceremony is performed in honor of and to appease the powerful goddess of fertility who watches over crops. So you see, every single culture. April 27th, a mythical half-man, half-animal. I've talked about that before. right at the Garden of Eden. Hybrids. Cain was a hybrid. Half man, half reptile. Snake. April 27th, the mythical half man, half animal being called Tiaiwara is honored annually on this day with songs and dances by farmers in the African Republic of Mali. It's believed among the Bambara tribe of that region that the Tiaiwara was sent down to earth by the gods of nature in order to teach human beings the necessary skills of farming. Doesn't this strike you as the same story as the Anunnaki having mated with human women, to which the offspring were known as the Nephilim? Every culture has a story of how agriculture was taught to them by aliens from space. And the half-man, half-animals that stayed to tend the flock of humans. Osiris, of course, being one of those deities. April 28th, ancient Rome, the beautiful goddess Flora was honored annually on this date. She was a fertility and vegetation goddess of springtime and flowering plants. Her 3-day festival, Floralia, talked about it earlier, marked the beginning of the growing season. April 29th, Pagan Tree Day. On this day, plant a tree dedicated to your favorite pagan goddess or god. For instance, plant a myrtle tree in honor of Venus and Aphrodite, an oak for Demeter or Diana and Hera, a pine for Attis, Cybele, and Pan. A rowan tree is to be planted for all moon goddesses, a sycamore for all Wiccan gods and goddesses. I wish I could get into the reason why these woods were on another show. A willow for Artemis, Bridget, Persephone. A yew for Hecate and Saturn. Which brings us to the final day of this bloodthirsty month of April. In Germany, April 13th, Walpurgisnacht begins at sunrise on this date and ends at sunrise on the first day of May. The next day, birch boughs are placed on all doors and windows to protect the home from evil spirits and sorcery. Traditional bonfires and torches of rosemary and juniper are lit, and according to legend, witches can be seen riding across the sky on broomsticks on this dark and magical night. On this date in the year 1988, the English witch Alexander Sanders, also known as the King of the Witches, by the way, died of lung cancer. He was gifted with psychic powers, it's said, and was the founder of the Alexandrian tradition of Wicca, if you practice that. Yes, that's April. The Roman goddess of flowers, Flora, also the goddess of gardens in spring. She embodies the beauty and riotous abundance of nature. She's associated not only with the flowering of plants, but also with the bloom of youth and its pleasures. Her festival, the Floralia, was held in late April to early May. Probably gave us the tradition of the maypole dance and the distribution of many baskets of flowers. This 6-day celebration became licentious or a licentious orgy. Flora proudly bears the title Lady of Pleasure, so you can understand what kind of pleasure. Yes, the joys of sensual indulgence, youth, and spring return. And one of the fairies in the Sleeping Beauty Walt Disney show, 1959 film, one of the fairies is named Flora, named after this very goddess, the goddess of sexual pleasure. One of the fairies in the Sleeping Beauty for your children. You didn't know that, did you? But you do now. At her christening, the good fairies Flora, dressed in red and pink, Fauna, she was dressed in green, and Merryweather, dressed in blue, arrived to bless her. Flora gives her the gift of beauty, while Fauna gives her the gift of song. In the tarot deck, the Empress number equals 3. Venus, Daleth, can be seen holding the flower lotus. She's seated in the tradition of a posture that symbolizes the alchemical salt. She is seen wearing the belt of the zodiac along with her Venus birds, and the pelican of self-surrender, and the heraldic white eagle of salt. Flora was said to have provided Juno with a magical flower that would allow her to conceive with no help from man whatsoever. From this virgin birth, Mars was born. From that virgin birth, Ishtar and Nimrod's Tammuz was born. From this virgin birth was Isis and Osiris's Horus born. From this virgin birth was born Jesus Christ from Mary, without the aid of man. Mars, Ares, raped a young priestess whose name was Rhea Silvia. As a result, Rhea Silvia became pregnant with 2 sons, Romulus and Remus. Yes, the founders of Rome, the twins, were impregnated from a rape. Guess what? Eve had twins, Cain and Abel. One conceived by the snake, one conceived by Adam. The first was a rape. The second consensual. Festival of Floralia is celebrated from April 28th through May 1st. It's got correlation with the May Day festivals of pagans everywhere. It's a fertility rite associated with both sisters. Flora for the birth of the flowers, and fauna for the birth of animals. Roman mythology, Tellus, goddess of the earth, had the 2 daughters, and they had small temples for bringing flowers and small animals for honoring their contribution to the plants and animals that made up the food stores for the people of Rome. Tellus is closely associated with the Greek goddess Ceres and has her own festival held in January, from the 24th to 26th, to set out offerings that the frozen ground would once again yield food for the coming year. Flora is also identified with the Greek goddess Chloris. That's where we get the name chlorophyll from. That's the natural occurring chemical that causes plants to grow green. Fauna is associated with the Greek Mother Earth, Gaia goddess, and had temples built in her honor as early as 268 BCE, and before, which is usually used by pagans, BCE. They choose it rather than BC. See, BCE stands before Common Era. BC stands for before Christ. So you can see where the pagan just wants to kind of eliminate that. The goddess Fauna has her own festival, which is called Fordicidia, I'm talking about tonight, and it's traditionally held on April 15th when cows are just getting ready to bear their calves. A simple way for today's practitioners in the Mother Earth faith is to celebrate Imbolc, February 2nd. More on that when I get back on a View from Space on Talk Radio AM 640. If you're not a regular listener, you will be surprised to find out that Imbolc has been celebrated, well, at least well known by you, but by a different name. That when it returned. So as I was saying, a very simple way for today's practitioners of the Mother Earth faith, I mean, like goddess worship, is to celebrate Imbolc on February 2nd. There's a tip-off for you if you didn't know that Imbolc was the real true name for Groundhog Day. The Roman Catholic Church actually changed it to Groundhog Day when they were trying to convert pagans to Christianity. It was thought if they were allowed to keep some of their holidays and simply twist them slightly, it would make the conversion easier to observe that the winter was ending and to celebrate both flora and fauna, along with other fertility goddesses on May Day, May 1st every year, as a symbol and hope that the coming months would bring fertility and prosperity. It's what it's all about. And they're using the gods to control the people. Flora, Roman goddess of flowers, honored during these celebrations with the wearing of a crown, flowers in the hair, while fauna is honored with the letting loose of rabbits. And you know, actually, it kind of reminds you of the Easter Bunny because, in fact, this very celebration does include Easter because Easter can go far into April on some, and as early as March. Because you see, Easter is not set by a certain date. Easter is controlled by the full moon. Look it up yourself. Greek mythology has many stories about figures named Chloris, or chloros, meaning greenish, yellow, pale, green, pale, pallid, or fresh. Chloris, meaning also nymph, as in mythological entities in human form, usually are female. And it's where we get the name chlorophyll from. They were typically associated with a particular location or landform, these nymphs. Others were part of a retinue of a god like Dionysus or Hermes or Pan, or a goddess, generally Artemis. Nymphs were the frequent targets of satyrs. They're frequently associated with the superior divinities. And if you ever research what a satyr's behavior is like, it's like a crazy, wanton, sexually perverted entity. Yes, they're frequently associated with the superior divinities. I would suggest to you that the sickest people in the world are the closest to our leaders. Case in point, Russell Williams, who used to fly around the Queen, now in jail for murder. Yeah, they're frequently associated with the superior divinities. The huntress Artemis, the prophetic Apollo, the reveler, god in wine, Dionysus, and rustic gods like Pan and Hermes. The symbolic marriage of a nymph and a patriarch, often the eponym of a people, is repeated endlessly in Greek origin myths. Their union lent authority to the archaic king and his line. Royal blood, holy blood, fairy blood is the true meaning and legacy of the Sangreal. Certain royal families in the Celtic world were said to carry the fairy blood, that is to say, the fate or destiny of the royal bloodline, while the elf princesses of romance and history were often called elf maidens. The certain royal families were said to carry the fairy blood, and it was their responsibility to safeguard the royal blood, but not only for their family, but for mankind itself, because they're so important for us. Elf maidens were the guardians of the earth, starlight and forest. It's for this reason that the elves have been called the Shining Ones, because they led the way. 60th anniversary, the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II's reign on the throne in the British Commonwealth is going to be celebrated in a big way, and you're going to see it. I know you're going to see the image that I'm going to portray to you right now, very soon. Queen Elizabeth II will be on a barge, rowed by the power of men. A royal barge, indeed, sailing down the Thames on her barge, with 1,000 other ships in her flotilla, celebrating the Diamond Jubilee. And her barge will be called Gloriana. This will commemorate in June. The name Gloriana, chosen for the barge that she'll be seated in, is so named after the Fairy Queen in the poem known as the Fairy Queen. Gloriana is an opera in 3 acts written by Benjamin Britten, taken from an English and dramatic musical work by William Plummer. It's based on Elizabeth I, the namesake of Queen Elizabeth II. It's based on Elizabeth I and Essex. Yes, the plot thickens. It's by Lytton Strachey, and it was no coincidence that the first performance was presented at the Royal Opera House in London, England in 1953 during the celebrations of the coronation of this reigning queen, Elizabeth II. But the Gloriana is actually taken from a dramatic musical written by William Plummer, based on Queen Elizabeth I and the Essex, the Earl of Essex. The opera depicts the relationship between Queen Elizabeth and the Earl, and it was composed specifically for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, made for this time. It was poorly received, it's said, even by Queen Elizabeth, and was supposedly one of the writer's few critical failures, and was not included, as a matter of fact, in a series of complete Decca recordings of his lifetime works. But on a very auspicious date, and that date happened to be the date of the 8th United States President to die in office, John Fitzgerald Kennedy's death. That date marked the sacrificial death and consecration of the new Atlantis. The old empire of America will crash, and the new global system will take its place that's coming. On November 22nd, 1963, the very day that 8th president, and I believe there will be one more to be consecrating this new Atlantis, dying in office in 1963, this was enacted. Brian Fairfax conducted a concert, performed, which was the opera's first performance of any form since its inaugural production in 1953, when Queen Elizabeth became coronated Queen of the British Commonwealth, November 22nd, 1963. Just happens to be the composer's 50th birthday. This also occults or hides the fact that the real true reason for the performance to be staged was really marking the consecration of the 8th president to die in office and one more to come, and it will be done, completed with 9. This also occults the fact, as I said, of that true reason of this new world order coming, connecting the new Atlantis, the new global system, to the Fairy Queen, the mystical power of this bloodline with the House of Windsor of British royalty. Sir Francis Bacon wrote a book called The New Atlantis, It's where they get their ideas from and base their plans on. Bacon was also a favorite of Rob Devereux, the Earl of Essex. He acted as the Earl of Essex confidential advisor. Queen Elizabeth I's favorite was for Francis Bacon. History records that Elizabeth I was impressed by this young man's precocious intellect and used to call him the young Lord Keeper. Both characters, the Earl of Essex and the Queen Elizabeth I, are the principal characters in the Fairy Queen opera, and it was Sir Francis Bacon who openly urged the execution for Mary, Queen of Scots. This was the rightful ruler, heir to the throne, taken by Queen Elizabeth I, who put Bloody Mary on trial using trumped-up charges of treason and then executed her by chopping her head off. Yes, the Gloriana will be sailing down the Thames, invoking the Fairy Queen and her bloodline. This has been A View from Space on Talk Radio AM 640. Coast to Coast's next. I'm Space, and I'm out.